Cat 0247 on March 17, 1943, a torpedo slammed into the hull of SS William Eustis in the North Atlantic. Convoy HX-229, the explosion ripped through the engine room. Boiling steam killed 6 men instantly. Fuel oil ignited. Flames shot 60 feet into the black sky. Before the crew could reach lifeboats, a second torpedo hit. The ship broke in half. 43 merchant sailors died screaming in freezing water, while German U-boats circled like sharks, picking off the next victim. That single night, Wolfpack sank 13 Allied ships. Convoy HX-229 lost 140 tons of cargo. Food for British children, fuel for British tanks, ammunition for British soldiers, all of it sinking to the bottom of the Atlantic. 3,000 miles away in Paris, Admiral Karl Dönitz read the kill reports and smiled. His U-boats had sunk more tonnage this month than any month in the entire war. 108 ships, 627,000 tons. His submarine commanders were calling it the greatest victory in naval history. Britain had 3 weeks of food left. Winston Churchill could not sleep. He paced the war rooms beneath London, chain-smoking cigars, staring at maps covered in red pins marking sunken ships. Later, he would write that the U-boat peril was the only thing during the war that ever truly frightened him. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost. Nobody had a solution, until a road builder from California decided to do something that every admiral in the United States Navy told him was completely insane. His name was Henry Kaiser, 61 years old. He had never built a warship. He had never served in the military. He had never even been to sea. But in 15 months he would build 50 aircraft carriers, and those carriers would kill 30,000 German submariners. Here is the number that haunts anyone who understands this war. 75%. That was the casualty rate of the German U-boat service, higher than kamikaze pilots, higher than Soviet penal battalions, the deadliest assignment in the entire war. Most of those men died after Henry Kaiser's ugly little ships entered service. They called them Kaiser coffins. They were wrong about who would end up in the coffins. January 1942, the American East Coast. German submarines arrived off New York Harbor and found paradise. American merchant ships were sailing alone. No escorts. Coastal cities refused to dim their lights. From his periscope, a U-boat captain could see cargo ships silhouetted perfectly against the glowing shoreline. Miami, Atlantic City, New York. It was, as Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hardigan wrote in his war diary, like shooting fish in a barrel. The Germans called it the second happy time. In 7 months, U-boats sank 500 ships along the American coast. Oil tankers exploded within sight of beach resorts. Bodies washed up on the sand at Virginia Beach. Tourists found life jackets and debris mixed with seashells. Locals started calling it Torpedo Alley. The Navy was humiliated. Admiral Ernest King commanded the United States fleet. He refused to implement convoy systems that the British had been begging him to adopt. He considered it defensive thinking. He wanted his destroyers hunting submarines, not babysitting merchant ships. His stubbornness cost lives, thousands of them. By summer 1942, the U-boats shifted back to the mid-Atlantic. This is where the real killing happened. A stretch of ocean beyond the range of any land-based aircraft, 600 miles wide. Submarines could surface here in broad daylight, recharge their batteries, wait for convoys. The Allies called it the Black Pit. The Germans called it home. This is where Dönitz perfected his Wolfpack tactics. Instead of individual submarines attacking alone, he coordinated groups of 10, 15, sometimes 20 U-boats against a single convoy. They shadowed the merchant ships during the day, radioed positions to headquarters. At night, they surfaced and attacked from all directions simultaneously. The escorts could not be everywhere. Convoy SC-107 departed Liverpool on October 24, 1942. 42 merchant ships, 4 escort vessels. The Wolfpack found them November 1st, 400 miles east of Newfoundland. 13 U-boats converged. The attacks continued for 4 nights. U-boats surfaced in darkness, fired torpedoes from close range, dove before escorts could respond. 15 ships sunk. 87,000 tons of cargo lost. food, fuel, ammunition, weapons, all of it sinking into 2,000 fathoms of black water. Convoy ONS 154 left Britain December 18, 1942. 45 merchant ships, 5 escorts. The Wolf Pack intercepted them December 26th, Boxing Day. The Germans chose the date deliberately. Allied crews would be celebrating, distracted. 20 U-boats attacked over 3 days. 14 ships sunk. The escorts managed to sink only 1 submarine in return. Exchange ratio, 14. 1 in Germany's favor, unsustainable for the Allies, acceptable for Dönitz. Convoy SC-118 steamed westward, February 1943. 63 merchant ships, 6 escorts. 20 U-boats found them in the Black Pit. The attacks lasted 6 days, February 4th through 10th, 11 ships torpedoed, 3 escorts damaged. The escorts fought back desperately. Depth charges, ramming attempts, gunfire. They managed to sink 3 U-boats, but 11 merchant ships still went down. 66,000 tons. The convoy reached New York with 52 ships, 11 empty positions in the formation, 11 crews dead or missing. The merchant sailors who survived these attacks were traumatized. They spent hours in freezing water watching their shipmates die, knowing that rescue ships might be torpedoed too. Many refused to sail again. Who could blame them? The mathematics were brutal. Germany was sinking ships faster than Allied yards could build them. Traditional shipyards needed 200 days to build a Liberty ship cargo vessel. At this rate, Britain would starve by autumn 1943. The invasion of Europe would be impossible. Germany might actually win. Something had to change. But what? The obvious answer was aircraft. Submarines were vulnerable on the surface. A single patrol plane could force a U-boat to dive, where it became slow, blind. The problem was range. The Black Pit was too far from any airfield. No plane could fly there, patrol for hours, and fly back. What the Allies needed was a way to put aircraft in the middle of the Atlantic. They needed aircraft carriers, but fleet carriers took 3 years to build. They cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They required thousands of skilled workers using specialized equipment. America had exactly 7 fleet carriers in service in 1942. Building enough to cover the Atlantic would take until 1946. By then, Britain would be a German colony. This is when Henry Kaiser made his move. June 1942, Washington, D.C. Kaiser walked into the Navy Department with a proposal that made experienced shipbuilders laugh out loud. 50 aircraft carriers. 1 year. Built on merchant ship hulls using assembly line techniques. The admirals thought he was joking. You have to understand who Henry Kaiser was. He was not a naval architect. He had dropped out of school at 13, started his career as a photographer, made his fortune building roads and dams. Hoover Dam, Grand Coulee Dam, Shasta Dam. He had never designed anything that floats. But Kaiser understood something the admirals had forgotten. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. He had already proven this with Liberty ships. His yards were building cargo vessels in 42 days instead of 200. He had replaced riveting with welding. He had broken down ship construction into standardized modules that could be prefabricated separately and assembled on the ways. He had trained housewives to be welders, farmers to be crane operators, teachers to be electricians. His workers had never seen the ocean. They did not need to. They were building components. The same principle, Kaiser argued, could apply to aircraft carriers. The Navy said no. Kaiser went over their heads, directly to President Roosevelt. Roosevelt understood the stakes. He ordered the Navy to give Kaiser a contract. The admirals were furious. Rear Admiral Howard Vickery of the Maritime Commission called Kaiser's proposal unrealistic. Captain T.A. Solberg of the Bureau of Ships questioned whether merchant shipyards could handle warship construction. Fleet carrier advocates argued that resources should go to real warships, not floating barges. One admiral's response became legend. "You cannot build aircraft carriers like you build automobiles." Kaiser did exactly that. The design was ugly. The Casablanca class displaced 10,900 tons. A fleet carrier displaced 27,000. The flight deck was 512 feet long. A fleet carrier was 870 feet. The engines produced 9,000 horsepower. A fleet carrier produced 150,000. Maximum speed was 19 knots. A fleet carrier did 33. Armament was purely defensive. One 5-inch gun. A handful of 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft mounts. No armor, no redundant systems. Commercial-grade machinery, commercial-grade hull plating. The sailors who received their assignments took one look at the specifications and understood immediately. These ships were death traps, CVE. The official designation meant carrier vessel escort. The crews invented their own meaning. Combustible, vulnerable, expendable. They called them Kaiser coffins, jeep carriers, baby flat tops, Woolworth carriers. Nobody expected them to survive combat. Nobody expected them to win anything. November 1942, Kaiser's Vancouver shipyard began construction. What happened next defied everything the Navy believed about shipbuilding. The yard covered 180 acres, 4 building ways. Each way could accommodate one escort carrier hull. Kaiser organized the yard like an automobile assembly line. Hull sections were prefabricated in different parts of the yard and brought together on the building ways. Station 1 built bow sections. Station 2 built midship sections. Station 3 built stern sections. Station 4 built the flight deck modules. Each station worked independently. Parallel production. Entire deck sections arrived complete with piping and wiring already installed. Electrical conduits, steam lines, fuel lines, damage control systems, everything integrated before the section ever reached the hull. Traditional shipyards installed these systems sequentially. Hull first, then pipes, then wires, then equipment. Kaiser's method installed everything simultaneously, cut construction time by 60%. Welders worked 3 shifts around the clock under floodlights. First shift, 600, 1400. Second shift, 1400, 2200. Third shift, 2200, 600. The yard never stopped. Sparks flew 24 hours a day. The noise was deafening. Rivet guns, welding torches, cranes. The smell of hot metal and welding flux filled the air for miles. Every component was standardized. Every hull section was identical to the one built yesterday. Every flight deck module matched perfectly. Every worker knew exactly what to do because the job was the same on every ship. Repeat, repeat, repeat. The workforce was extraordinary. Housewives who had never held a welding torch, farmers who had never operated a crane, teachers who had never read a ship blueprint. Kaiser trained them in 6 weeks. Classroom instruction, on-the-job training, safety protocols, quality control. Most had never seen the ocean. They did not need to. They were building sections, not ships. The sections would become ships after assembly, but the workers only needed to understand their specific task. Weld this joint, install this pipe, connect this wire. Do it 1,000 times. Do it correctly every time. April 5th, 1943. USS Casablanca launched. Hull number CVE 55. Displacement 10,900 tons. Length 512 feet. Beam 65 feet. Flight deck 477 feet, usable length. Complement 860 officers and men. Aircraft capacity 27 fighters and torpedo bombers. The launch ceremony was brief. No champagne, no speeches. The ship slid down the ways at 1400 hours. Tugboats guided her to the fitting-out dock. Work crews swarmed aboard immediately. Installing radar, mounting guns, rigging arresting gear, the ship would be ready for sea trials in 6 weeks. April 19th. USS Liscombe Bay launched. CVE 56. Identical specifications, same displacement, same dimensions, same systems. Launch at 10:30 hours. Fitting out began same day. May 3rd. USS Anzio launched. CVE 57. May 17th. USS Corregidor launched. CVE 58. May 31st. USS Mission Bay launched. CVE 59. The pace was insane. 1 carrier every 11 days in April and May. Then, production accelerated. June brought carriers every 9 days. July every 8 days. August, the yard achieved 1 carrier per week. Every Monday morning, a new escort carrier slid down the ways. Every Monday afternoon, fitting-out crews began work. Every Friday, the completed carrier from 6 weeks earlier departed for sea trials. The rhythm was hypnotic, relentless. By July 1944, all 50 carriers were complete. The final tally. CVE 55 through CVE 104, 50 Casablanca-class escort carriers. Average construction time, 7. 2 months from keel laying to commissioning. Total construction time for entire class, 15 months. Traditional fleet carriers required 36 months. Kaiser's escort carriers took 40% of the time. Cost 10% as much, carried 20% of the aircraft. But there were 50 of them. Numbers matter. Volume production matters. Industrial capacity matters. Traditional shipyards needed 3 years to build a fleet carrier. Kaiser built 50 escort carriers in 15 months. But quantity meant nothing if the ships could not fight. The first combat deployment answered that question. May 1943. USS Bogue entered the North Atlantic. Her crew discovered that operating from an escort carrier was terrifying. The flight deck pitched and rolled violently in heavy seas. The thin hull transmitted every wave impact. Landing accidents happened constantly. Planes crashed into the barriers. Planes rolled off the deck. Planes stalled on approach and plunged into the ocean. The pilots who survived the landing attempt still had to find submarines. 8-hour patrols over featureless grey ocean. Dead reckoning navigation, unreliable radios, and at the end another landing attempt on a pitching deck while carrying depth charges and fuel that would explode if anything went wrong. Lieutenant Danny Mao later described it as controlled suicide. But then something changed. Bletchley Park. The British codebreakers had cracked German naval enigma. They could read Dönitz's orders to his submarines. They knew where the wolf packs were gathering. They knew which convoys were targeted. This intelligence went to the escort carriers. Instead of defending convoys, they started hunting. Admiral Royal Ingersoll called it the hunter-killer doctrine, May 22, 1943. Aircraft from USS Bogue's Composite Squadron 9 spotted a submarine contact. They attacked. Depth charges straddled the surfaced U-boat. Water erupted in massive columns. When the spray settled, oil and debris marked where U-569 used to be. First kill. The weapon that admirals mocked had drawn blood. But this was just the beginning. In Paris, Dönitz stared at the loss reports and felt the first cold touch of fear. His commanders were reporting aircraft where aircraft should not exist, hundreds of miles from land. In the middle of the Black Pit, his sanctuary had been violated. March 1943, U-boats sank 108 ships. May 1943, U-boats sank 6 ships. In exchange, 15 submarines destroyed. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz issued the most painful order of his career. All boats currently in the North Atlantic are to withdraw immediately. For 4 years, his submarines had ruled the Atlantic. Now they were running. The U-boat commanders who received this order were shocked. They had been told the enemy had nothing that could threaten them. They had been told the Black Pit belonged to Germany forever. They had been lied to. Because 50 Kaiser coffins were just entering service. 1 every week, each carrying 27 aircraft, each guided by intelligence that Dönitz did not know existed. The hunters had become the hunted. But Dönitz was not surrendering. He was regrouping. His engineers were developing acoustic torpedoes, Zaunkönig, Wren in German. The Allies called them Genat, German Navy acoustic torpedo. These torpedoes tracked propeller noise, snorkel systems that allowed submarines to run submerged, radar warning receivers to detect aircraft. Between June 1943 and May 1944, German shipyards launched 237 new submarines. The war was not over, and in America, one captain was preparing something even more audacious than Kaiser's carriers. His name was Daniel Fee Gallery. He commanded the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal. He did not want to sink German submarines. He wanted to capture one. Naval intelligence told him the idea was reckless, dangerous, potentially catastrophic. If the Germans discovered America was trying to board their submarines, they would change every code, every cipher. Years of intelligence work would be destroyed. Gallery was directly ordered to abandon the plan. He ignored the order. October 1943, Washington, D.C. Captain Gallery walked into the U-boat tracking room at Navy headquarters. The man waiting for him was Commander Kenneth Knowles. He ran the tracking room. coordinated every hunter-killer operation in the Atlantic. Knowles did not look happy. Gallery saluted. Knowles did not return it. "Captain Gallery," Knowles began. His voice was cold, controlled. "Do you understand what you are proposing?" Gallery stood at attention. "I want to capture a German submarine, sir. Board it before the crew can scuttle. Seize the Enigma machine and all associated materials." Knowles slammed his palm on the desk. Maps scattered, coffee spilled. "And do you understand what happens if you fail?" He leaned forward, eyes burning. "If the Germans discover we are attempting to capture their submarines, they will change every code, every cipher setting, every communication protocol. We will lose everything we have built at Bletchley Park. Years of work, thousands of lives saved by our ability to read their traffic, all of it gone because you wanted to play pirate." The silence was suffocating. Gallery did not flinch. "Sir, the Germans already assume we are trying to capture their boats. Every U-boat commander has standing orders to scuttle rather than surrender. The risk exists whether we attempt boarding or not." He paused, chose his next words carefully. "But the reward of success exceeds anything we might lose in failure. Current Enigma settings, updated tactical directives, technical documentation on their new acoustic torpedoes. The intelligence value would be incalculable." Knowles stared at him for a long moment, then spoke the words that should have ended Gallery's career. "Your request is denied. You will conduct standard hunter-killer operations. You will sink submarines. You will not attempt boarding under any circumstances." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That is a direct order from Naval Intelligence. Violate it and I will personally ensure your court-martial. Dismissed." Gallery saluted, turned, walked out, and began planning how to do it anyway. But he needed allies, powerful ones, the kind who could protect him from Knowles when everything went wrong. He found one in Admiral Royal Ingersoll. Ingersoll commanded the entire Atlantic Fleet. He had invented the hunter-killer doctrine that transformed escort carrier operations. More importantly, he understood that aggressive innovation wins wars. Gallery made his case in Ingersoll's office. The intelligence value of a captured Enigma, the psychological impact on German submariners, the possibility of seizing technical documentation about new weapon systems, and his core argument, proper preparation can make boarding feasible. Ingersoll listened without interrupting. When Gallery finished, the Admiral asked one question. "Can you do it without getting your task group killed?" Gallery's answer was immediate. "I can train my crews until boarding becomes reflex. We will practice until every sailor knows exactly what to do in the 60 seconds between a submarine surfacing and its crew completing scuttling procedures. We will have damage control parties ready to seal hatches and stop flooding." He met Ingersoll's eyes. "We will rehearse until failure becomes impossible." Ingersoll nodded slowly, then made a decision that Naval Intelligence would never officially approve. "You have 6 months to prepare. If an opportunity presents itself, and only if conditions are favorable, you may attempt boarding." He leaned forward. "But understand this clearly, Captain. If you fail, if the Germans learn what we are doing, I will deny any knowledge of this conversation. You will face Knowles alone." Gallery smiled. That was more than he expected. It was enough. November 1943, Bermuda, Task Group 22. 3 began training. Gallery had assembled his team. The escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, 5 destroyer escorts, Pillsbury, Pope, Flaherty, Chatelain, Jenks. Crews who had no idea what their captain was planning. The first challenge was tactical. Standard depth charge attacks destroyed submarines completely. Gallery needed his crews to disable them instead, damage dive planes and rudders, crack pressure hulls enough to force surfacing, without causing catastrophic flooding. The weapon was the Hedgehog. 24 contact-fused projectiles fired in a pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths, Hedgehog rounds only detonated on direct contact. A skilled commander could place them exactly where he wanted. Gallery drilled his destroyer escort captains relentlessly. Approach angles, firing solutions, target selection. They practiced until they could hit a submarine's conning tower without destroying the entire boat. Then came the boarding parties. Lieutenant Albert David volunteered to lead the first team. 23 years old, damage control officer aboard USS Pillsbury, he possessed either extraordinary courage or complete inability to recognize danger. Gallery was not sure which. He did not care. David selected 8 men. They trained in the waters off Bermuda using a captured Italian submarine as their practice target. Again and again they approached in a whaleboat, climbed the slippery hull, dropped through the conning tower hatch into darkness, located scuttling valves, pretended to close them, gathered imaginary documents, raced against stopwatches. The first attempts were disasters. Men fell from the hull. Boarding parties got lost in unfamiliar compartments. Simulated flooding overwhelmed damage control efforts. Gallery watched each failure, demanded they try again. After 3 months, boarding time dropped from 8 minutes to 4, then 3, then 90 seconds. From whaleboat alongside to first man through the hatch, 90 seconds. But training was not combat. Gallery knew everything would be different when German sailors were shooting at his men, when the submarine was actually flooding, when booby traps might be waiting in the darkness. January 1944, Task Group 22. 3 deployed on its first operational patrol. Gallery's orders were standard. Hunt submarines in the Central Atlantic. Kill everything you find. But every officer in the task group knew the real mission. They were looking for a submarine to capture. The first engagement came January 16th. Guadalcanal's aircraft detected U-544 on the surface. Gallery's destroyers closed for attack. Hedgehog rounds found their mark. The submarine dived, trailing oil. More attacks followed. Explosions rocked the deep water. Debris surfaced. U-544 was destroyed with all hands. 53 German sailors dead. No possibility of boarding. Gallery was disappointed but not discouraged. The attack proved his destroyers could execute precision strikes. Next time, he would be more patient. April 9th. Task Group 22. 3 found U-515 southwest of Madeira. This was a different kind of target. U-515's commander was Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke, one of Germany's most decorated submarine aces. 25 Allied ships sunk. The Iron Cross, with oak leaves. A crew of veterans who knew exactly how to fight. Gallery's aircraft attacked at dawn. Avengers dropped depth charges. Wildcats strafed the conning tower. Henke crash-dived. But the damage was done. His boat was leaking. His dive planes were jammed. After hours of depth charge attacks, U-515 surfaced. Gallery saw his opportunity. He ordered Pillsbury to close for boarding. But Henke was too experienced, too fast. German sailors poured onto the deck, opening scuttling valves as they abandoned ship. U-515's bow rose toward the sky. The submarine slid beneath the waves in less than 2 minutes. 44 German sailors were captured, including Henke himself. But the submarine was gone. 800 feet down, along with its Enigma machine and codebooks. Gallery came agonizingly close. He spent the next 2 months refining tactics. His boarding parties needed to be faster. His aircraft needed to suppress German crews before they could reach scuttling valves. Every second of delay meant losing another submarine to the depths. June 4, 1944, west of the Cape Verde Islands, 2 days before D-Day, Gallery knew nothing of the Normandy invasion. His focus was entirely on the contact his aircraft had just reported. U-505, Type 1XC submarine. Commander Oberleutnant zur See Harold Lange. Homeward bound from West Africa. Crew exhausted. Fuel low. Lange believed he was safely beyond Allied patrol range. He was wrong. 11:10 hours. Wildcat fighters spotted U-505's periscope cutting through calm seas. The submarine was running just below the surface, recharging batteries. The pilot dove immediately, strafed the water with 50 caliber machine guns to mark the position. 3 Avengers joined within minutes. Depth charges exploded around U-505. The submarine surfaced. Gallery watched from Guadalcanal's bridge. Grey hull streaming water. Conning tower intact but damaged. German sailors climbing through the hatch. Some wounded, some wearing life jackets. All of them abandoning ship. Gallery keyed his radio. All escorts close on target. Prepare boarding parties. This is not a drill. Chatelaine reached the submarine first. Her Hedgehog attack had cracked U-505's pressure hull and jammed the rudder. The boat was circling slowly to port, unmanned. Sinking by the stern. Pillsbury's whaleboat was already in the water. Lieutenant Albert David stood at the bow, 8 men behind him. They had practiced this 100 times. Now they would do it for real. 11:15 hours. The whaleboat came alongside. The submarine's deck was slippery with seawater and oil. David grabbed the conning tower railing, pulled himself up. Below him, through the open hatch, he heard water rushing into flooded compartments. The smell of diesel fuel and battery acid filled the air. Everything they had been told said the submarine was probably booby-trapped. Everything they knew said it was definitely sinking. Every instinct screamed to get away before the boat dragged them down. David went through the hatch anyway. The control room was chaos. Emergency lights cast red shadows. Water was ankle-deep and rising. Electrical panels sparked and smoked. Somewhere below, pumps were fighting a losing battle against the ocean. David sent his men in different directions. Find the scuttling valves. Find the enigma. Find anything that looks important. They had maybe 5 minutes before U-505 went to the bottom. Torpedo man's mate. Arthur Knispel found the main scuttling valve in the forward torpedo room. It was open, seawater gushing through at hundreds of gallons per minute. Knispel dove under the surface, fighting the current, his hands searching for the valve wheel. His lungs burning, his eyes stinging from salt water. He found the wheel, pulled. The valve began to close. The flooding slowed. In the radio room, radio man Stanley Wadowiak found what they came for. The Enigma machine sat on its mounting bracket, undamaged. Codebooks stacked on the table, apparently prepared for destruction but never thrown overboard. Wadowiak grabbed everything he could carry. David coordinated the chaos. More boarding party members arrived. They sealed hatches, started pumps, shored up damaged bulkheads. Against all probability, U-505 stopped sinking. On Guadalcanal's bridge, Gallery watched something no American naval officer had witnessed since 1815. His men had captured an enemy warship at sea. The next several hours became the strangest voyage in naval history. Guadalcanal took U-505 under tow. Aircraft maintained patrol overhead. Destroyer escorts screened against any German rescue attempt. The intelligence haul exceeded anything Gallery imagined. Updated Enigma rotor settings, recent tactical directives, technical manuals for German acoustic torpedoes, maps showing U-boat patrol areas. The material would save thousands of Allied lives in the war's final year. Gallery received the Distinguished Service Medal. Lieutenant Albert David received the Medal of Honor. The crew of U-505, 58 men captured without a single American casualty, spent the rest of the war in a special prisoner camp, isolated to prevent word of the capture reaching Germany. The secret held. German naval intelligence never learned that U-505 was captured rather than sunk. Enigma settings remained unchanged. The Allies continued reading U-boat traffic until the war's end. Task Group 22. 3 had proven that the Kaiser coffins could do more than kill submarines. They could capture them. But the war was far from over. Between June 1944 and May 1945, escort carriers and their aircraft sank or assisted in sinking 53 German submarines. The statistics became grotesque. September 1943, convoy ONS-18 steamed westward from Britain. 19 U-boats converged over 3 days. They carried the new Zaunkönig acoustic torpedoes, weapons designed specifically to home on the propeller noise of escort vessels. The results were devastating. HMS Lagan was hit first, then HMS Polyanthus, then HMCS St. Croix. 3 escort ships torpedoed in a single engagement. But the escort carriers struck back with overwhelming force. Aircraft from HMS Fencer and USS Card saturated the operational area. They flew continuous patrols despite brutal weather. They attacked every submarine contact with depth charges, rockets, and acoustic homing torpedoes of their own. The American Mark 24. Fido was so secret that aircrew were forbidden to mention its existence. It tracked the sound of submarine propellers underwater. 4 U-boats destroyed in the convoy battle, many more damaged. Exchange ratio, 3 escorts lost, 4 submarines destroyed. Convoy delivered intact. Dönitz called it a tactical victory. His staff knew better. Losing 4 submarines to sink 3 escorts was unsustainable mathematics. November 24, 1943. The Gilbert Islands, Pacific Theater, USS Liscome Bay operated near Makin Atoll. A single torpedo from Japanese submarine I-175 struck her starboard side. The torpedo penetrated the aircraft bomb storage compartment. The explosion was catastrophic. Liscome Bay's magazine detonated in a massive fireball that split the ship nearly in half. The escort carrier sank in 23 minutes. Of 916 men aboard, 644 died. It was the deadliest single American naval loss since Pearl Harbor. The tragedy validated every fear critics raised about escort carriers. These ships were floating bombs. A single torpedo penetrating the thin hull could reach ammunition storage and fuel tanks that fleet carriers protected with armor. The Kaiser coffins had no such protection. Questions erupted in Washington. Are escort carriers worth the risk? Should construction continue? Is the entire program a mistake? But the debate ended the only way it could, with results. May 1944, the Atlantic became a killing ground, not for Allied convoys, for German submarines. The statistics turned grotesque. May 29, 1944, North Atlantic, Task Group 21. 11 operated around USS Block Island. The escort carrier had been hunting submarines for 3 months. Her aircraft and escorting destroyers had already sunk 4 U-boats. 2013 hours. Sonar operator aboard destroyer Escort Ahrens detected something wrong. A contact, close, moving fast. U-549 had been stalking the task group for hours. Her commander, Captain Lieutenant Detlef Krankenhagen, was on his first war patrol. He had watched the carrier's aircraft fly overhead all day, waiting for darkness, waiting for his chance. 3 torpedoes left U-549's tubes. The first struck Block Island's bow. The second hit her stern 4 seconds later, penetrated an oil tank and ammunition magazine. A third torpedo followed. Block Island was finished. Captain Francis Hughes ordered abandoned ship at 2140 hours. The crew evacuated despite fires spreading through the hangar deck. 6 men died in the torpedo explosions. The remaining 951 reached life rafts. Block Island sank at 2155 hours. The only American aircraft carrier lost to submarine action in the Atlantic during the entire war. But U-549's triumph lasted less than an hour. Destroyer escort Eugene E. Elmore obtained sonar contact as the submarine attempted to escape. 2127 hours. Hedgehog mortars arced through the darkness, found their target. The explosions were final. U-549 died with her entire crew. 57 German sailors killed to sink 1 escort carrier, 1 carrier that would be replaced within 2 weeks. The mathematics of attrition had reached their ultimate expression. Germany destroyed escort carriers at the cost of submarines and crews. America built carriers faster than U-boats could sink them. The exchange was fatal for Germany, acceptable for America. June 1944, D-Day. Allied forces landed at Normandy. The invasion demanded absolute control of the English Channel and western approaches. Every U-boat that might threaten the invasion fleet had to be found and destroyed. Escort carriers deployed in unprecedented numbers. 11 American CVEs operated in the Atlantic by July. British escort carriers added their aircraft to the constant patrols. The mid-Atlantic gap that had been the U-boat sanctuary became their graveyard. The statistics became grotesque. In June 1944, hunter-killer groups accounted for 60% of all U-boats sunk by American forces in the Atlantic, not convoy escorts, not land-based patrol aircraft. The Kaiser coffins and their destroyer screens had become the primary submarine killers. USS Bogue's task group destroyed 12 U-boats over 15 months. USS Card's group sank 11. USS Guadalcanal's group killed 5 and captured 1. USS Croatan, USS Kor, USS Santee. Each added to the mounting German losses. The individual engagements blurred together into a campaign of systematic destruction. July 17, 1944. USS Anzio aircraft located U-509 on the surface west of the Azores. Depth charges straddled the boat. The submarine attempted to dive. More attacks followed. Oil and debris marked the grave of 46 German sailors. August 3, 1944. Task Group 22, 5, found U-804 northeast of the Cape Verde Islands. Coordinated attacks by aircraft and destroyer escorts continued for 6 hours. The submarine was forced to surface. Her crew abandoned ship. U-804 sank with scuttling valves open. August 20th, 1944. USS Cards Group caught U-1229 attempting to land agents on the coast of Maine. Aircraft attacked immediately. Destroyer escorts closed for the kill. The submarine never completed its mission, all hands lost. The pattern repeated across the Atlantic. U-boat detected. U-boat attacked. U-boat destroyed. German commanders who survived recorded the psychological impact. Oberleutnant Herbert Werner, commanding U-415, captured the desperation. Every patrol after May 1943 was a survival exercise disguised as a military operation. We understood that Allied technology had rendered our methods obsolete. We could barely surface to charge batteries without aircraft appearing overhead. We could not approach convoy routes without encountering hunter-killer groups that pursued us relentlessly. Werner survived the war. Most of his colleagues did not. The statistics tell a story that Dönitz could not deny. Of approximately 40 Sazonwarren men who served in German submarines during World War II, 30 Sazonwarren died. 75% casualties, higher than any other military service in the war. The majority of those deaths occurred after the escort carriers closed the mid-Atlantic gap, after the hunter-killer doctrine transformed defensive convoy protection into offensive submarine hunting, after the Kaiser coffins that professional naval officers dismissed as inadequate proved they could dominate the Atlantic. By September 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was mathematically won, not officially over. U-boats continued sailing, continued dying. But the strategic outcome was no longer in doubt. German submarines could not sink ships faster than Allied yards built them. They could not survive long enough to accomplish missions. They had become sacrifices sent to sea, because withdrawal would free Allied resources for other purposes. Dönitz understood this reality. He continued operations anyway. Every escort carrier hunting U-boats in the Atlantic was not supporting the invasion of Europe. Every destroyer escort prosecuting submarine contacts was not bombarding German coastal defenses. The U-boat force had failed its strategic mission, but it continued serving a tactical purpose. The cost was measured in young men who climbed into steel cylinders, knowing they would probably never return. The Kaiser coffins that everyone mocked had strangled the most effective submarine force in history. 30 Suezorus German submariners dead, most of them killed by 50 ugly little ships that professional naval officers said could never accomplish anything meaningful. The war ended in May 1945. The Kaiser coffins were decommissioned within 2 years. Most were scrapped, their steel recycled into automobiles and construction materials. The ships themselves vanished, but their legacy endured. Henry J. Kaiser never built another warship after the war ended. His Vancouver shipyard, which had produced 50 escort carriers at a rate of 1 per week, transitioned back to civilian construction. Kaiser turned his attention to healthcare. Founding Kaiser Permanente, he built automobiles. He constructed housing developments that shaped post-war American suburbs. When asked about his wartime contribution, Kaiser was characteristically blunt. "We built what the Navy needed when they needed it. That was the job. We did the job." He received the Presidential Medal for Merit, the highest civilian honor available during wartime. He was celebrated as an industrial genius who had applied assembly line thinking to shipbuilding. But Kaiser himself seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. "The workers did it," he would say. "I just organized them." Kaiser died in 1967 at age 85. His obituaries mentioned the Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam, the Kaiser healthcare system. The escort carriers received a paragraph, sometimes 2. The man who built the weapons that won the Atlantic War was remembered primarily for what he did after the war ended. Captain Daniel 5. Gallery lived long enough to see his achievement recognized and then questioned. Immediately after capturing U-505, Gallery was promoted and decorated. The Distinguished Service Medal acknowledged what no American naval officer had accomplished since 1815. He had taken an enemy warship as a prize at sea, but Gallery was also controversial. His willingness to disobey naval intelligence directives, his aggressive pursuit of boarding operations, that risked compromising Enigma secrets, his self-promotional instincts. Some colleagues admired his boldness. Others considered him a reckless publicity seeker who endangered critical intelligence operations for personal glory. Gallery retired as a rear admiral in 1960. He spent his remaining years writing books about naval history and submarine warfare. His memoir, Clear the Decks, became a bestseller. He appeared on television programs discussing World War II naval operations, and he fought publicly to have U-505 preserved as a museum exhibit rather than scrapped. When Gallery died in 1977, he left behind a complicated legacy. He had achieved something remarkable. He had also made choices that senior officers questioned for decades afterward. Lieutenant Albert David, the young officer who led the boarding party into the sinking submarine, received the Medal of Honor for his actions on June 4, 1944. He was 23 years old. He had climbed through a conning tower hatch into a vessel that might have been booby-trapped. That was certainly flooding. That German doctrine said should kill anyone foolish enough to board. David survived the war, but he did not live to see old age. He died in 1945, just months after Germany surrendered, from complications following routine surgery. The Medal of Honor winner who captured U-505 never had the chance to tell his grandchildren what he had done. The 8 men who followed David through that hatch received Navy Crosses and Silver Stars. They returned to civilian life, raised families, worked ordinary jobs. Most never spoke publicly about what they had accomplished. The boarding of U-505 became a story their children heard, sometimes believed, sometimes dismissed as wartime exaggeration. But the real legacy of the escort carriers was not measured in medals or memoirs. It was measured in what came after. The 50 Casablanca-class carriers that Kaiser built were decommissioned within 2 years of the war's end. These purpose-built submarine hunters had no role in a peacetime navy that emphasized fleet carriers and amphibious operations. USS Casablanca herself, the lead ship that had proven the concept, was scrapped in 1947. Her steel was recycled into automobiles and construction materials. Most of her sisters met similar fates. By 1960, only one Casablanca-class carrier remained in American service. She was decommissioned that same year. The ships themselves vanished, but what they represented endured. The escort carrier concept evolved into something more sophisticated after World War II. The lessons learned about air power projection from small platforms influenced naval architecture for generations. Light aircraft carriers, helicopter assault ships, modern amphibious carriers, all trace their ancestry to the Kaiser coffins that admirals once dismissed. Today, every major navy operates vessels that embody the escort carrier philosophy. Ships optimized for specific missions rather than general fleet operations. Platforms that sacrifice size and sophistication for numbers and availability. The principle that adequate equipment in sufficient quantities defeats superior equipment in limited numbers continues shaping military procurement worldwide. The statistics tell the final story. Escort carriers and their aircraft sank or assisted in sinking 53 German submarines during World War II. Hunter-killer groups protected convoys carrying millions of tons of supplies to Europe. The closure of the Mid-Atlantic Gap allowed the build-up that made D-Day possible. Historians estimate that escort carriers saved between 50, 70 and 100 Allied lives by shortening the Battle of the Atlantic. 100 lives. Because a road builder decided to build aircraft carriers like automobiles. But the lesson of the Kaiser coffins extends far beyond military history. It is a lesson about innovation, about institutions, about the courage required to challenge conventional wisdom. Every military establishment resists change. The admirals who rejected Kaiser's proposal were not stupid. They were experienced professionals who understood ship design better than any civilian contractor. They were also wrong. Their expertise blinded them to possibilities that an outsider could see clearly. They knew all the reasons why escort carriers would fail. They had forgotten how to imagine ways they might succeed. This pattern repeats throughout history. Billy Mitchell was court-martialed for insisting that aircraft could sink battleships. He was right. Hyman Rickover was nearly forced out of the Navy for pushing nuclear propulsion. He was right. John Boyd was marginalized for advocating energy maneuverability theory in fighter design. He was right. The innovators who change warfare are rarely welcomed by the institutions they serve. They succeed anyway, because sometimes being right matters more than being popular, and because sometimes the outsider sees what the expert cannot. Henry Kaiser was a road builder who revolutionized shipbuilding. Daniel Gallery was a captain who disobeyed direct orders. Albert David was a 23-year-old lieutenant who climbed into a sinking submarine. None of them fit the profile of a military hero. All of them changed history, and there is one final detail that most people who hear this story never learn. U-505, the submarine that Captain Gallery captured on June 4, 1944, did not go to the scrapyard. It did not rust away in a naval reserve fleet. It did not sink into the Atlantic, carrying its secrets to the ocean floor. U-505 is still here. After the war, Gallery campaigned tirelessly to preserve the captured submarine as a museum exhibit. He argued that U-505 represented unique historical significance, the only German submarine captured by American forces, the only Enigma machine taken from a Type 9 boat, a physical artifact of the Battle of the Atlantic that future generations could see and touch. The Navy resisted. Maintaining a German submarine seemed inappropriate in the immediate post-war period. Storage costs were significant. Other priorities demanded attention. Gallery refused to accept rejection. He lobbied politicians, he wrote articles, he gave speeches. He approached the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago with a proposal that seemed almost as audacious as capturing the submarine in the first place. Bring U-505 to Chicago. Display it as a permanent exhibit. Let Americans see what their fathers and brothers had fought against. The logistics were extraordinary. U-505 had to be transported from the East Coast through the St. Lawrence Seaway, across the Great Lakes, into Chicago's harbor. The submarine then had to be moved overland through city streets to the museum's location in Hyde Park. On September 25, 1954, U-505 completed its final voyage. The submarine that German engineers had built to terrorize Allied convoys was pulled through Chicago on a massive trailer. Crowds lined the streets to watch. It came to rest beside the Museum of Science and Industry, where it has remained for 70 years. Today you can walk through U-505. You can stand in the control room where Lieutenant Albert David descended through the conning tower hatch. You can see the torpedo tubes that might have sunk merchant ships if the submarine had completed its patrol. You can touch the steel hull that Kaiser's escort carriers forced to the surface. More than 30 million people have visited U-505 since it went on display. School children learn about submarine warfare. Veterans bring grandchildren to show them what the war was really like. Historians study the boat's technology and construction. The submarine that was supposed to sink beneath the Atlantic waves became the most visited captured enemy vessel in history. And here is the detail that completes the story. U-505's final resting place sits approximately 20 miles from the shipyards where Kaiser built the Liberty ships that supplied the Atlantic convoys. The submarine that hunted those convoys and the industrial complex that kept them sailing exist within the same metropolitan region. Hunter and hunted, predator and prey. German engineering and American industrial capacity. They ended up neighbors. From a road builder with an idea that admirals called impossible to 50 escort carriers that changed the course of history, Henry Kaiser proved that innovation does not require credentials, that adequate weapons in sufficient numbers defeat superior weapons in limited quantities, that industrial democracy can outproduce military aristocracy when the stakes are high enough. The Kaiser coffins sank 53 German submarines. They closed the mid-Atlantic air gap that had been the U-boat sanctuary. They transformed defensive convoy protection into aggressive submarine hunting. They helped win a battle that Churchill called the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. And they did it while professional naval officers insisted they were too slow, too vulnerable, too poorly designed to accomplish anything meaningful. 30 Zuzueren German submariners died during World War II, 75% of everyone who served. Many of them were killed by weapons that their admirals had laughed at, ships that serious navies would never build. Vessels crewed by men whose survival prospects seemed marginal at best. Those men survived. They won, and their story deserves to be remembered. Because sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unlikely weapons. Because sometimes innovation matters more than tradition. Because sometimes 50 ugly little ships can accomplish what the experts said was impossible. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about builders who changed warfare. Stories about captains who disobeyed orders. Stories about ordinary men who did extraordinary things. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Henry Kaiser, Daniel Gallery, and Albert David don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.